Good afternoon. How are you diddling? Excellent. Me too. Thank you very much for asking. Welcome to another episode of Dazed and Confused, my 3 times a week. See, I can do 3. A live video where I talk to you about social media, about video, digital marketing, all the stuff that you could be doing to try and make your brand, your business stand out a little bit more, especially in these strange times that we are all living in at the moment. So today we're going to be talking about podcasting. It's a subject I've covered quite a lot. I've got somebody who's going to come and talk to me about podcasting as well. We'll introduce them in just a moment. First things first, though, who the hell am I to tell you anything? Well, I'm Simon Scholes. I'm the founder and creative director of Perception Studios. We're an award-winning visual marketing agency, and we help brands and businesses create content that helps them stand out, be it visuals like video, animation, aerial work, graphics, all that kind of thing. We also help them with the digital aspect of marketing as well, but we specialize in video social content. However, a few years ago, it became very obvious to me during a life event that not every brand, not every business was in a position necessarily to have the money to spend on having content created on a regular basis. So what could I do to help those people start creating content themselves for free? My favorite 4-letter word, especially being a Yorkshireman. So I sat down and I came up with a process that I'd talked about for years. Other people had kind of spoken about it as well. I kind of pinched bits and pieces, bastardized it, turned it to my own, called it How to 9 Times Your Social Media, turned it into a book, went to number 1. Yay me. And you can still get a copy of that in the section below as well. And it takes you through from everything that is marketing planning right the way through to today's subject matter, podcasting, and all the stuff that happens in between as well. So, the whole idea of these lives, and there have been all the way through lockdown, is just to try and get you creating some content, get people actually talking about you on different social media platforms, so that when we come out of the other side of this craziness, we all still have a business to go back to in the first place. So today, like I said, we're going to talk about podcasts. We're going to talk about lots of different subjects connected to podcasts. And so, without further ado, I'm going to bring on my guest today. This is Neil Velio. Hello, Neil.
Hello, Simon. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And Neil runs a podcast studio company. He's kind of like a podcast coach almost, called Pod Knows How. That's right, isn't it? Or is that the name of the podcast?
Pod Knows How. That's a great name. I wish I'd thought of that one. No, my company is called Pod Knows Productions. And I have a podcast, Your Business Needs a Podcast, which by the title probably gives it away that it's aimed at small businesses that want to start a podcast. Cool.
So for anybody who doesn't know who you are, because obviously we've worked together in the past, I know who you are, but for anybody who doesn't know who you are, explain who you are, kind of give a bit of a gist of your background, that kind of stuff.
A very similar backstory to you, actually, Simon, in that I used to be a radio professional. I started out in the mid-90s. God, remember those days. And
when radio was good.
Yeah, back when absolutely. Let's not get into that. It's a totally different conversation. And yeah, I just sort of started out in local radio, built my way up, ended up in London for my sins in the early 2000s, and achieved what I thought were the dreams, which was working on London radio stations, going national, that kind of thing. And then obviously the radio industry kind of went pop, sort of mid 2000s, up until fairly recently, where it's just ended essentially. And I just decided, well, what can I do? Like, we all sort of get to that stage sometimes in our lives where we the story ends, so we need to write a new chapter. And I thought, well, I love audio. I'm never going to give audio up. How can I monetize my skills working with audio? And of course, podcasting, I'd sort of dabbled with it back in the radio days. About 2001, was working with a company called Storm Live, which was run by Bruno Brooks, the former Radio 1 Top 40 DJ.
No, well.
And yes, he was, who doesn't know Bruno? I mean, the guy's a legend. I still feel very fondly about him now, actually, because I feel that he was a real pioneer in what we're doing now. I mean, I remember we had a meeting in around about July 2000 when he sat us all down, and some of the sort of the people that were in that room, like Joe Guest, Nell McAndrew, like talk about a who's who of people that were famous, Joe Absalom from EastEnders. And we were all laughing because he was saying, you know, all of this is going to be irrelevant in about 15, 20 years' time. People will be listening to us and other radio stations on one of these, on a phone. And we were like, what? radio, why would you want to listen to radio through your phone? It's like, it's tinny. You try, bus boys, to quote In Between Us, bus wankers, all those people that sort of listen to their phones on the bus, and it's like, it's the most off-putting thing in the world. So we couldn't really conjure that image in our head of radio being delivered through that platform. Lo and behold, we're here, and I'm so grateful to Bruno for sort of setting that in motion. That at 2001, I uploaded audio of my then radio show onto the website, and people were downloading it, and it just sort of, from that, I kind of branched off into other avenues, short clips, and built them up over time, longer and longer form content, until eventually I went, you know what, let's just get into producing almost like audio documentaries bespoke to that listening base. And here we are.
So, I mean, you kind of described it a little bit there, but there's all sorts of different types of podcasts. What would you say is a podcast? Because you do get the ones where it's just music being mixed. You get ones where people are talking. What would you say a podcast is?
To me, it is anything that you listen to. So I know you get a lot of people saying, "Oh, a podcast can be video. It can be anything. It can, I'm one of those purists where I believe if you're not listening to it and it's not on demand and it's not delivering specific content customized to the listener, then it's not a podcast. I mean, I know what you were talking about, those mix shows where you get, I mean, a lot of them have been pulled now. Funnily enough, it's a really interesting point, actually, because, everyone from Calvin Harris through to Avicii through to, who's who in the world of DJing, EDM, they all had a podcast, but they're not podcasts because they're mix shows, and there is an app specific to that called Mixcloud, and they've all sort of had to now leave Apple Podcasts and all the other apps, because another thing people don't realize is you can't legally use music on a podcast anyway unless it's completely royalty free. So for me, a podcast is something where there's a specific subject matter that I'm interested in, and it's delivering content relevant to that subject on demand, so I can subscribe to it, and it's I'm in that world.
And it's spoken word, basically, is what you're saying. It's not
absolutely.
Yeah. And so taking that on then, what would you say is the best type of podcast for people to possibly think about? Would it be interview style? Would it be somebody just talking, which is what I do? Would it just be multi-host where you've got multiple people? Does every single one of those work for each person, or do they maybe one type work for a person, or what have you?
It all comes down really to two formats. And when you break it all down, it doesn't matter what it is, it comes down to one or two formats. And that is, number one, what I like to call the ranty monologue format. And that is somebody sat down, and that could be one person. Absolutely. Yeah, but you've made a career out of it. So it's great. It could be one person. It could be a group of, three people. It could even be, somebody standing in a group on a stage and recording that. That is still a ranty monologue format. Then you can have what I call the conversation format. And that, again, can be one person or two people, rather, or three or four people. But the point is, one format is all about delivering one-way traffic. So it's essentially, it's a viewpoint, it's a perspective, and it's you delivering that perspective and, that perception on brand to that audience. Whereas the conversation is more about, okay, we're now going to discover. So we're going to sit down and we're going to have other people or other, speakers, or even if it's documentary form, maybe you've got audio that you want to use and you want to sort of commentary on that. Yeah. That is more of a conversation format. So whatever you want to do, you can do either. But what I would say to you is you need to think about which one of those two you're going to go for. You could mix them both up. To be honest, I've got podcasters that are doing both the ranty monologue kind of style and also the conversational style. And as long as it fits within your brand and within your why, which we'll probably get to in a minute, as long as it's on that brand and it ticks that box, it doesn't really matter too much.
Mm-hmm. So if there's a small business watching or listening to the podcast audio of this later on, why should somebody with a business think about podcasting? For me, I say to them, look, there's lots of different steps and you can make life a little bit easy for yourself, but the podcast is probably the most frictionless piece of content that there is. Everything else takes time to consume. A podcast, I even publicized this interview with you today on LinkedIn and said, and in true podcast terms, switches on, walk away, do whatever you were doing and have the audio on in the background, because that's what a podcast is. Is that what you would say to people? Or is there another reason why you would say to do podcasting as well?
It depends on what again, we come back to the why. There are several reasons to do a podcast. And whenever somebody comes to me and they say, look, Neil, I'm interested in getting into podcasting. I want to do one. My first question to them is, well, okay, what's the outcome? What's the desired goal? Because depending on what that goal is, determines whether or not I feel I can. I'm not saying they shouldn't do one, but I know what I can help them deliver, and there are things that I can't help them deliver. That being, if they want to top the iTunes top 10, well, that's not what I'm about. That's not what. There are podcast producers out there that their entire mission is they're going to get podcasts in the iTunes top 10, okay? I'm not going to delve into how they're doing it. It's a grey area of ethics and morality as far as I'm concerned. But the point is, if that's what they want, then I'm probably going to turn around to them and say, look, okay, I get what you want to do. You want to get your brand out there. It's more of a vanity project, and that's fine. I've got no problem with that whatsoever, but maybe you need to work with somebody else. If they're looking to do more kind of like the long game, where they want to get return on their investments. In other words, they want to invest now. It's like any kind of marketing. You're not going to get overnight success with anything you do. And if you do, then you're not doing it right. You put a Facebook ad out there, the first Facebook ad you put out, you're probably not going to make 100% ROI just because it takes time. And for me, that's kind of where I'm going with the way I approach things. Why would you want a podcast? Well, here's the simple question to ask yourself. Do I want to make money? I'm guessing your answer to that will probably be a resounding yes. Well, in other words, you need a podcast. And why does this help you make money? Very simple. Every single transaction that happens, be it in business, with products, with courses, with, you name it, whatever you can sell, whatever you can monetize, there is always that 3 keywords that dictate whether you're going to close that deal. Know, like, trust. Okay? If I see a post on social media that is just text or an image, or sometimes even video if it's not done the correct way, is that making me know you, like you, and trust you? Probably not, because I'm not getting the dynamic. There is no emotion in words, okay? Mm-hmm. You can trigger an emotion if you use certain words, but you're not actually delivering an emotion. So if you have a podcast and someone can hear you, they can get to know you. Over time, after listening to a couple of episodes, they're going to slowly get to like you. And when they know that you're going to show up every single week or every single month, if that's the way you want to do it, however you want to do it, some even do it every day. I think that's nuts, but whatever floats your boat. If you're showing up, no, because again, not a podcast. Videos are different. In terms of the know, like, and the trust, you are going to build that trust when you're showing up, when you're giving the value. As long as you're not going on every episode going, hi, welcome along to the Johnny Walker Show. God, Johnny Walker, there's a flash.
Johnny Walker, there's a name.
There's an ex-radio legend. Welcome along to the Johnny Walker Show. And if you go to www.johnnywalker.com/buy, it's just going to put people off. Whereas if you're actually delivering the content up front and you're saying, right, here's my perspective on things, here's how I can help you with your problem, suddenly I'm going to go, wow, this guy, this gal knows what they're talking about. I know them, I like them, and I trust them. How can I buy their products? Because they clearly know what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's all about that value. So when it comes to podcasting, I mean, we might have very differing viewpoints on this. How easy is it to start podcasting?
It's really easy to start podcasting. It's not so easy to start good podcasting. And that is, of course, look, that's a subjective thing. I know where you're going with this because I've seen your content and you are, and I don't disagree with you, you are very much of the ilk, from what I, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're very much like, just get it going, just get it started, don't overthink it, just get it done. And I, to a certain extent, I agree with that massively. The worst thing you can do is say, I want to do a podcast, right, okay, what do I need to do? And then suddenly you get into that rabbit hole of doubt where it's like, oh God, what microphone do I buy? Oh my God, where do I record it? Oh my God, what's my format going to be? Oh my God, how am I going to get? And before you know it, you're asking so many questions, you never get it started until someone like me comes along and goes, why haven't you started yet? But what I'm saying is you need to do that basic level of research. So no, you don't want to go straight out and buy a Blue Yeti. Okay, just don't do that. You look,
don't buy
a Blue
one anyway.
No, don't buy one anyway. But look, I'm not here to I am here to slag off Blue Yetis. I do it almost daily in my content. But the point is, if a Blue Yeti suits your environment and it suits your budget, and you're one of these people, you're like what I like to call the iPhone generation, where they just want a box that does the job, easily plugged in and easily gets on with it, not too worried about the quality, but they want it to do the job. Well, fine. Look, if that's your bag, then go for it. But what I would say to you is, if you're hoping for massive results, you're probably not going to get it with that kind of a microphone, because there are so many people that say nobody cares what it sounds like. That's absolute BS. People do care what it sounds like. And I mean, as someone that, listens to these things almost on a daily basis, I probably listen to more podcasts than most people. And it's very simple. If I hear a podcast where the audio is unlistenable, I stopped watching and listening. Well, it wasn't a podcast. I watched a video, and it was something I was really interested in today. And I turned it off after 7 seconds because I couldn't hear the girl speak. She was... No, I'm
Did she have
out.
a face mask on?
No,
what it was? She was being
she was
careful
socially
of the virus.
Sadly, no, it was just literally because she was recording it through a laptop. And, that for me is the fundamental point that, people say, well, what about these podcasters that are really bad and they've got terrible equipment and they've got 1 million listeners? Yeah, there's a reason they got 1 million listeners. They're the sorts of people, they're called influencers. And people would literally sit and listen to them if they were talking through a sock, because it's about the fan base that they've built. People will forgive. But if you're just starting out as Johnny Nobody running a tyre company in Hungerford, or, Newbury or Thatcham or somewhere like that, if you're doing really poor quality audio, then you're not going to build that fan base in the first place, because they're going to go, right, well, we've got you talking about tyres, and then I've got this professional company. Let's say, for example, I don't even know if ATS have a podcast, probably. You got the professional voiceover, you've got the good, nice production, the music, you've got someone that knows what they're talking about, and they're sounding really professional. Which am I going to listen to? Am I going to listen to, Johnny No Tyres, or I'm going to listen to the ATS podcast? Probably a no-brainer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you've mentioned it already, but I want to go back into it because you've said about how video doesn't make a podcast. What then do you say to people who create content like that and make millions? Let's talk Seth. Let's talk Joe. Joe Rogan, obviously bought up by Spotify, makes a fortune. His content was specifically video, which was turned into podcast. Jack Mate is a UK version of that. His podcast was usually recently taken from YouTube onto Spotify, and then they put clips onto YouTube, so it kind of drags the audience across. Would you say they're not creating podcasts then?
So I know the guy that makes the Jack Mate podcast because he used to be a radio presenter, and he's I wouldn't go into too much detail in the backseat because my mate won't thank me for this, but we have mutual friends, and even he would probably agree that the video element of the podcast is not a podcast. It's look, it's really
I must
simple.
admit, I've always said myself, a podcast is audio. It's not video. That's the question.
Why? So the way I would approach this then is, what's your outcome? What's your desired goal?
It's more eyes getting value. For me, it's more eyes getting value from the content that I'm putting out. Oh, excuse me. More value from the audience getting value from that I'm putting out. Because for me, it's not about necessarily monetizing it. It's about helping as many people as I possibly can do along the way. I mean, I'm not so sure what the Joe Rogan reasoning for the video necessarily is, other than going, oh yeah, that really is Elon Musk lighting up a big fat one. I don't know.
You watched that episode too then? Yeah. For me, it's really simple. I think they're two very different platforms that literally, you probably know about Modality. Modality is all about what triggers your emotional responses. And if you don't know anything about modality and you want to be in any way involved in the marketing space, I definitely recommend that you look into it, because what it tells you, what it teaches you, is that one size doesn't fit all. I know there's a lot of people out there that will go, right, I have video now. And Gary Vaynerchuk, bless him, is exactly what I'm talking about here. His whole thing is you can take one piece of content, split it into 100 different pieces, and it'll still work. And I disagree with that entirely. And here's why. If the piece of content that you're creating and you don't know what you're doing refers to something specifically visual, unless you can adapt that to the audio version, it's lost.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna tally in with that modality, because I personally, weirdly enough, am an audio person, right? So I respond really well to audio. Video, not so much. And certainly not with although I love reading and I've written stuff myself in the past, I love the written word, I love language, I love the way it works, but that's not my modality. That's just like kind of a hobby that sometimes it's a means to an end. With audio, if you're going to come at me with audio content, you've got me. I'm hooked. I want to know what you're going to talk about. As soon as you start sort of talking in that audio about the video and look at this and look at that, I'm lost. I'm like, well, hang on a minute, I can't see this. And, back in the radio days when we used to sort of talk about visuals don't work, don't start talking about this thing you watched or this thing you're seeing. Talk about what you've heard and relay it to the different modalities that way. So say, for example, you see something in the paper. You don't say, necessarily, did you see that thing in the paper? You can say, did you hear about that thing that was in the paper the other day? Oh, I saw it. And then you can tick all the modalities. You can even do the kinesthetic one where you can talk about how it made you feel. Yeah. So modality is really important here. And this is why I'm saying that a podcast, it is a very specific audience. You're not going to get people that love YouTube, love watching crazy videos on TikTok of their mum dancing in a pajamas, all that kind of stuff. You're not going to really connect with those people if you're doing a podcast. Okay, you're going to connect with the people that like to get in their car, stick the the speaker on, the Bluetooth speaker on, and hear while they're driving, while they're doing whatever they're doing, the shopping, in their earphones. You're not going to connect as well with the video audience. Video does a brilliant job of connecting with those kinds of people. But to say, as long as it's content, it's a podcast, to me is misleading, because you are not going to connect with everybody that likes podcasts with a video.
No, absolutely. And I mean, a good example was, obviously I take the audio from these and put them onto my podcast channel. But like the other day, I was talking about something visually, which I was showing on screen. But because of my background, obviously I was able to kind of take the words I was going to say and make sure that they were audibly visual as well, if you get what I mean. I was explaining what I was seeing. But obviously some other people just go, yeah, would you look at that? What a great phone case.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, I have no idea what you're talking about. So, I mean, you've talked about how easy it is to get started. You don't necessarily need the most expensive kit. Would you say a podcast has to be edited?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. And in fact, I even, if you want the long form version of this response, then I have an episode devoted to this on my own podcast, which you're welcome to send people to.
We'll put the link in the section below.
Brilliant. But, the short answer is, look, it's about respecting time. The thing, so if you're going to go in, this is the analogy I like to give people. So everyone at the moment, right, has at some point probably been in a networking meeting. I'm guessing either a BNI or a Chamber of Commerce or whatever, the countless Sterling network, you name it. There's 1,000 of these things at the moment, and everyone's going to them because people are panicking. They're like, I've got to get my brand out there. And, if you're going to go into a Zoom meeting, the whole thing, right, it's usually about 2 hours long on average, most of these networking meetings. And what you're getting is a mixture of people that know what they're doing. Like you and I, if we go to a meeting, we're usually going to be able to get our message out in the 60 seconds pitch time that we've got. We're going to, get to the point. We know what we're talking about. We know how to deliver the message. A lot of people don't, because not everyone has the experience and the skill sets that we have. So they'll go in there and they'll be like, right, my company is John's Kitchen and Bar. That Johnny Walker is really multi-talented.
He's everywhere, isn't he?
Let's say Amy's. Okay, let's be 2020 and all that. Amy's Kitchen and Bathrooms, and what we do is we take board. So if you think about it, if you're having that kind of reaction when you go into these real world meetings and you're thinking, get to the point, how do you think your audience feels when they hear you waffling on, asking the same question 4 times in 4 different ways, repeat the same sentence halfway through, then start it again? The amount of podcasts I hear where it'll be like, so John, tell me, what's your thoughts on, how do you feel about, and it's like, how many times do you need to start this sentence? Cut all that out. What I want to hear is the question and the answer. Yes, I want to hear a bit of your personality around it. I'm not saying you cut every single bit out, but if it doesn't move the episode forward, if I don't need to hear it in order to build in my head a picture of you as a person or what you're about and what you're getting to, get rid of it. Don't need it.
That's good. And it kind of lays back into what I always preach as well, is that it doesn't have to be perfect, but as long as you keep that story moving effectively, that's the best way forward. So it's going to lead me on to my last question, and I probably know the answer because this is what you do for a living. Should somebody pay for someone to edit their content then? Or could they spend the time to learn? It didn't take me too long to learn, but maybe it's just that I'm that type of person. But should people sit down and take the time to understand what they're doing? Or should they just go, look, let's just hand this over?
It's really interesting that you say. So I'm going to ask you a question back on that, because this is exactly the kind of stuff that I love. This is what I really love about my job, is delving into people. So you say it didn't take you that long to learn. What is it that you've learned that didn't take you too long?
It was the cutting, splicing, understanding where to take breaths out or what have you, how to, basically, like you say, to keep that flow going. Maybe it was the fact that I'd worked in radio for a long time before I came to the point of doing the editing that was able to help me understand how it should sound. But the actual process of the editing side of things probably didn't take me that long to sit down and get a good gist. Okay, I wasn't like the world's greatest Z100 editor at the time. I was when I finished my radio career, but not right now back then. But yeah, so it was just a good place to start, kind of thing.
I would say bingo. That for me is, you've hit the nail on the head. Like you technically, you could do podcasting as a gig, because but this is the thing, it comes down to a few different levels, and I said this just the other day on a LinkedIn post. There are something like 400, somebody told me 420 podcast professionals in the southeast of England alone, right? And I wonder where they've come from. What major event happened in industry quite recently that led to 420 podcasters that are offering their services?
Well, I've recently downloaded Audacity, so I know what to do.
Look, anybody can learn to edit audio, but if you think that podcasting is editing audio, then I would say you probably got a bit more to learn, because there's lots to it, really. I could go on and give you my pitch. I'm not going to, because Simon, I respect your time. You're a busy dad, and you haven't got all afternoon to sort of listen to me ranting on about this. But what I would say to you is this: starting a podcast is, even before you begin, there's a whole process. And what I will do, whenever somebody comes to me and they say, Neil, I really want to get a podcast for my brand. I've got a really small company, don't have a huge amount of budget, but I want to get the best possible professional sounding audio out there. How do I do it? And my answer is always the same. Right. Well, number one, we need to figure out what you want to get out of it. Number two, we need to figure out, when you say you don't have a lot of budget, not a lot of budget to one person can be, 50 quid a month. To another person, it could be 10 grand a month, because different levels of corporates, companies, you name it, have different marketing budgets. If you're spending less than $5,000 a month on your marketing budget and you're in business, then you're probably not a strong business yet, because that's pretty much what it costs for most businesses to do their marketing. So that's the first approach. Then the second approach is, what do you want your podcast to be? Anybody could sit down, and I see it so often, is somebody goes, right, I'm an accountant. I want to do a podcast. Right, okay, so what's your podcast going to be? Well, I'm going to do a podcast about accountancy and all the ins. Okay, boring. Okay, you do not want to do an accountancy podcast. Okay, what you have to do is you have to sit down and you have to think outside the box a bit. And that's where I come in, the brainstorming, because when you're too close to it, and I've been guilty, I've launched something like 110 shows now over my lifetime. And I'd say a good half of those I got it completely wrong, because what I've done is I've gone, right, what is this for? It's for a radio station. It's for insert company here. Right, what does that company do? Right, so let's do a podcast for that space. Wrong, because unless you're in the space already, you're not going to be interested. And if you are in the space already and you're interested, how am I going to get money from you? Well, I'm probably not, because you're in the space. So what you have to do is you have to think about, how can you deliver value to the end customer?
Yeah.
So if you're an accountant, you're probably not going to deliver value to an end customer if you're talking about accountancy, unless they're already a customer. So what you got to do is you got to think about how you can get into the B2B space. How can an accountant connect with other businesses and get money from them? Well, how about you deliver some value offerings like accounts? What does every accountant know? Loads of businesses. So would you say that accountants are probably best placed to give business advice? Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So that might be where you might want to be thinking. And the same for, like, let's go back to Amy's Tires. No, it wasn't Amy. She was Kitchens. Johnny's Tires. Johnny Walker and his tire company, right? If you're running a company that deals with tires, well, what you might want to be doing is looking at general motoring tips, or perhaps you want to be looking at, stories about, this is a bit macabre, but stories about accidents and how to prevent them, that sort of thing. In other words, don't think about immediately about what you're offering. Think about what your authority within the space could be and how you can offer some value to people that might want to listen. Because what will then happen, if they, again, get to trust you as a thought leader, they might be more willing to do business with you.
I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, the amount of times I've sat down and I've spoken to accountants and I've said, look, give value, do stories about how people can save money, the 5 top money-saving tips on fuel expenses, or those types of things. Or there was a chauffeur, what would I write about, or what would I talk about? Well, do a blog about road safety in winter and the checks that you do to make sure that your car's safe and that kind. So the value thing is absolutely integral, I think. To
can I give you one quick example of a podcast that at the moment, this is the one that my go-to example that I'm telling people about, because I think they've got it so spot on. So you and I are a bit old for this now, and a bit sort of not single enough. But there's a dating app called. Oh yeah, kids, I forgot. Yeah, there's a dating app called Bumble. Okay, and I say all the kids, like I think its target demographic is probably about 18 to 32. Okay, so pretty much a hot AC radio station from the 90s, and they have a podcast. Okay, now you might think it's a podcast about how to get the best out of dating apps. It isn't. Well, it kind of is, because that's kind of the general message. But what they've done is they have identified a pain point within dating, which is that whole thing where most bloody men who will do the right swipe and they'll get connected to the chick and then they'll say, right, okay, can I send you a picture of my appendage? And then they go, no, block, right? So what normally happens is dating apps as a result get a bad reputation. One of the other pieces of bad reputation is with men that seem interested because they like the photos, but then when they actually get chatting to the girl, they realize they've got very little in common with them and don't possibly want to date them. So they do something called ghosting. Okay, and what Bumble have done is they've said, it'd be a really great idea if we get some of the victims of these ghostings on the podcast to talk about their experiences. And what did they call it? Ghost stories. How
Brilliant.
Amazing is that?
Awesome. What a great idea. I've got a few questions coming in. Have you got time to do a couple of questions?
Of course. Yeah, no
Brilliant.
worries.
Okay. So they've come in from one particular person who watches the content on a regular basis, but he does a podcast for Legion Aid. He's a huge Legion Aid fan. And he's had some real headway with it. It's been really good. So Ed McIntyre's asking the first question, which is artwork. How important is it?
Wow. It is so important. And it's important if you want to get discovery. In other words, if you don't already have a massive fan base, you don't already have an established tribe who will literally click on your content no matter what. The reason it's great for discovery is that Apple Podcasts, whatever anybody wants to tell you, Spotify are going to argue this, so are Stitcher, so are Google Podcasts. But the fact of the matter is, Apple Podcast is still responsible for most of your podcast audience, just because they're ahead of the curve. They were doing this before anybody else. So most of your audience is going to be on Apple Podcasts. Therefore, Apple Podcasts pretty much determines whether or not your podcast will get traffic. Okay. And contrary to popular belief, it is all manually curated. So you don't get podcasts that do really well and suddenly end up in, the new and noteworthy section or, hot new releases, that kind of thing, whatever they're calling it this week. So as a result of that, what you need to do is make sure that your artwork stands out. It's got to be Apple's big thing. They're not even shy about saying this. Their number one thing is how it looks on the app. So if you've got really dodgy artwork that's been done by yourself in Canva, it'll be fine for your brand. It'll be fine for your own website. It'll be fine for, your friends and family. But if you want Apple to go, wow, that's amazing artwork, we need that on our front page, you really need to invest in either, an independent freelance marketing, graphic designer, or, don't go on Fiverr is what I would advise. You can if you want, it's cheaper, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would go with something like 99 Designs, or, if you know somebody that's in graphic design, maybe in a networking group or something, ask them if they will, have a look, first of all, at the other artwork in Apple, because it does have kind of a bit of a themed look about it. It's very pretty. The colors are really quite bright. It's really nice looking. And just get somebody to sit down and identify what makes, what the fundamentals of that artwork of other podcasts is, those that are in the new and noteworthy, and try and almost not copy it, but do that style.
Yeah. And is also asking, because it's a double header podcast. It's quite a long question, so I won't put it on the screen. But he's got a microphone. Sounds great, but his co-host has one on a headset. Doesn't sound so good. Is it important that both the hosts have the same kind of kit, same kind of sounding stuff? Or because Ed's probably the lead host, does it really matter so much?
I would say, yeah, it probably does, to be honest. You can get away. There's a big podcast that's been around for years. And now I can't think of what it's called, but it's basically, it's going to come to me in a minute, but there's a huge, answer me this. That's it. Answer me this. And you've got your main podcast host and your main co-host, and she's huge now. I mean, she's a massive megastar. She does all the podcast festivals and hosts them. And then you've got another third host who's clearly remotely on Skype. And boy, does it stand out. And it's one of the things, a lot of people I talk to about that show, they say, love the idea of it, but I can't listen to it because it puts me off when I hear the third host dive in. And it would almost be better off just not having him. And I kind of agree with that to a certain, it sounds harsh and cruel, but it's about the audio side of it. If you've got two really strong hosts with really good audio, and then you've got a third person, it's almost like casting in TV. You're not going to have a third weak link to hold the whole show back. You're going to think about maybe using them in a different way. And, you, by all means, you could use them in some way, maybe as a caller, or maybe, in some other way that doesn't detract from the main sound. But what I would say to you is this, with callers, with guests, with anybody that isn't integral to the show, it doesn't matter. There's those that say, oh, you can't do interviews via Zoom. It's got to, no, well, screw that. You can do things via Zoom, because people will accept that the audio of the guest is not going to be, people have been listening to people on phone lines, for God's sake, for the last 30 years. So they're not going to worry about a Zoom call quality. But with your main hosts, absolutely, I think it's worth investing in a decent second mic.
Cool. And he's got two more questions because another couple have just popped up. First one, how important are headphones when recording? Me personally, I obviously don't use them. You do. How important would you say a pair of headphones is?
I mean, if you're monitoring the audio in real time, then they're absolutely fundamentally important, I suppose, because you need to hear that you're going out, because otherwise you could be standing here and all I could be saying is... And you're like, what? Why can't you hear that you're not saying anything? But, in terms of the actual recording process, they're not... I would say have something to monitor. You could even get your mobile phone earphones and use those. Obviously, when it comes to editing, the better you've got, the better, because obviously you need to hear the nuances, you need to hear the clicks, and some of those sometimes don't come out that well in little sort of in-ear monitors. These are broadcast headphones. They pick up a mouse down the road, so that's why. But yeah, you can get away with cheap headphones. I wouldn't worry too much about that.
Cool. And his last question is video or audio editing software. Do you recommend any for doing recording podcasts remotely?
Remotely, I would say...
That's obviously what they're having to do during the current situation.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I mean, I swear by Adobe Audition. And, I love that Audacity exists because it's a great training ground. But in terms of if you want to put out professional content, record it, be reliable, all that sort of stuff, Adobe Audition all the way without even taking a breath.
And any particular software online that, like a Zoom-esque, is there an audio version of Zoom kind of thing?
In terms of, I see what you mean. Yes, of course. So, I would say you could use Zoom, and because what I would say, I'm giving away a big secret here now, actually. But what I would say is what you record for the actual main meat and potatoes, as I call it, of the conversation, i.e. the Q&A, you can do that in Zoom, and that's fine. Then all you need to do is top and tail it with studio quality. So your intro, you're going to do it on your mic. You're going to do it in your studio surroundings, so that's fine. And you can even, if you're really clever about it, what you can do is re-record your questions. If they're not sounding so good on Zoom, re-record them in the same style. If you're not terrible at this, no one's really going to go, hang on a minute, that doesn't sound like that's live, because it's not
different.
So, you got to sort of almost approach this with a post-production head as well, that you got to have an idea in your head of how it's going to sound at the end, and then, reach that end goal in your head by doing what you need to do during the recording process.
Doing the best you can. Cool. Neil, it's been an absolute pleasure. And the last thing I want to talk to you about is the fact that I saw this the other day on LinkedIn. I thought it was a great idea. So I want to give you a chance to plug this because I think it's brilliant. I don't know if you've got any spaces left, but you were talking about you doing a podcast now, pay later type thing. What's that all about?
So obviously we're in a lockdown again, and it's kind of that fear factor thing, isn't it? Of I really want to do it, but I don't know where the money's coming from, and how am I going to pay for this? So the idea is, and it is conditional. I'll be very honest about this. I'm not here to sort of record 4 free podcasts for you to then disappear.
Yeah,
but,
you're not a charity. No.
I'm not a charity. I've got to pay bills, man. You know what I mean? I've got expensive taste. Not at all. But
gotta
the
keep
idea
the
is
going.
I wish, yeah. Not Gary Vaynerchuk, unfortunately. So the idea is that you can get the ball rolling now, so we can do the sort of nitty gritty stuff and get the planning out of the way, come up with the concept, and even record the episodes now, so that by the time it comes to actually being back in the frame and wanting to push this stuff, you've got content ready to go. So the idea is you do the business with me now, and then once you're back at it, you can pay then.
Fab stuff. Great. So if you ever want to chat to Neil at all, I'm going to take all of his links, all his details. I'm going to put them in the description box below after this broadcast. But Neil Velio, thank you very much for chatting to us today.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. I've been a bit nervous because it was the first live thing I've done in a while, but I absolutely loved it. Brilliant time. Thank you.
Like me, I
mean, great fun.
Cool. Cheers, Neil. And there you have it. Podcasting. It's that simple. Kinda. Anyway, thank you so much for watching today. As always, if you are brand new to any of these streams that you're watching on at the moment, be it Twitch, Periscope, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, make sure you hit the follow button. And because you've hit the follow button, right next door to it is the share button. So share this content with your audience. Let them know all about it. And if you're watching or listening on a replay, make sure that you put any questions you might have into the comment section, and I'll pass them on to Neil, and he can maybe get in touch with you and try and give you an answer if you possibly can do, or you can do some one-to-one consultation and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, until Friday, when I'll be back again, it is Daddy Daycare Day again. So who knows what time I'll be live. Please do continue to stay safe in these strange times, and have a good one.